let's call our meeting to order and start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay, Sam, are you going to put up your flag?
Hold it up there, yeah.
Okay, well, we'll use Kate's for us. So do that. Okay, I pledge allegiance
Pledge allegiance to the flag.
To the flag of the United
States of
America and to the republic
For which it
which
stands,
it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under God,
under God, indivisible,
with
liberty and justice for all.
Okay, good job. Kate, if we could do the roll call, please.
Yes. Jamie Allen,
present.
Dan Brule,
Here.
Melissa Narrett,
Here.
Keith Ravenberg,
Here.
Lindsay Spencer,
Here.
Carrie Trostel,
Here.
Mark Wolmer.
Here.
Okay, and for citizens' comments, so Brian, do you want to explain? There was an opportunity for people to submit citizens' comments, and we did not receive any.
Correct. The procedure that we'll do while we do these online meetings, Sam sent it out in some different formats, allowing people to send in any comments as long as it was in advance of the meetings, and then we would read those during the open session, but we did not receive any comments. Okay. And we'll continue to do that in the future. So if people have comments, they can let us know ahead of time or always email us. Okay, we'll move on to the consent agendas and a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move that we approve the consent agenda items as listed.
Melissa, unmute.
I second.
Sorry. Forgot I was looking at the agenda, not what I was doing.
Okay. Any discussion on that? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that passes, and we are going to move on to the superintendent's report.
Very good. First off, I have some COVID-19 updates for the team, and then any questions regarding that. We are continuing to do our food bank. That's gone very well, thanks to the generosity of the Brentwood community. We've been delivering serving over 25 families on a regular basis. And we actually still have a surplus of food in the conference room. So we're going to continue to do that indefinitely. It's worked out very well. In addition, our meals to students, that's continued to increase. We're currently averaging, we're serving about 50 to 55 students a day, breakfast and lunch. So that equates to about an average of 500 meals a week that we're providing free of charge to our community. Virtual instruction continues to go well. The teachers have been working really hard. They meet daily with their grade level teams and their professional learning communities. They continue to look at different ways to try to interact creatively with students, making videos, doing various Google Meets, doing online lessons. So they're doing a really great job, and I'd like to do a shout out to Carrie Trostel, because Carrie gave us the idea to do a staff appreciation day for our teachers and TAs and so forth, everyone who's been working so hard to serve kids. So this coming Friday is a staff appreciation day. So the teachers are being asked to, take the day and enjoy a 3-day weekend. And we're sending out information to parents so that they know, and kind of gonna hope that maybe some parents and kids will send teachers some nice thoughts and notes of gratitude and so forth. So that's been very well received by the staff this week. They really appreciated all of us thinking of them. End of the year planning continues. Dr. Johnson has, all the principals are thinking about these things, what they could do for various end of the year culminating activities. Obviously, graduation being the preeminent one. When Sam does his communications report here in a minute, he can fill in anything because he's also served on that committee as well. We're looking at various options, including, we want to recognize the traditional end of the year time with, we've ordered some personalized signs that will go in the students' yards. They're looking at some of the other creative ways to recognize that time. But then we are also still wanting to keep open the option of a late July live graduation that would take place on the football field. We're still hoping that will be a possibility. And if that's not, we're actively planning for a online version that could be very well done as well. So that's going to be our backup plan, and Sam can speak to that a little bit. We also had a question from a board member regarding our SRO, and our SRO still remains with the district, but he has been pulled onto a beat since we can't use him at this time, and I will follow up with the department to see how that will work on the compensation. I have not had a chance to talk to the lieutenant or captain in regards to that. Questions from the board?
So Brian, do you, I know it's early, but what does it look like, conversations in terms of, and what's the process in terms of what next year starts to look like? Right, I know, granted, very, very early, but I'm assuming you're involved with the district, county health, et cetera. Just any update or heads up on what that might look like?
Yeah, public health hasn't really chimed in on it. Now I do, starting tomorrow, I'm on a Zoom meeting with all the superintendents in the area, and we can choose from 3 different committees. One is graduation. I'm trying to think of the second one, but the third one, which is the one I'm interested in, is called reentry. So that's the one I'm actually going to be joining, and that's going to become an ongoing study group. So I feel like, with graduation, that we've got, some plans in place. And I think the other one was kind of end of the year kind of things, but I'm already more thinking ahead to what does it look like both academically, because there's going to be a transition time where, our focus needs to be for our teachers to be talking to the prior grade levels and to really ascertain what key standards were they not able to fully get to, basically, or fully, develop in an online setting. So I feel like at least the first probably 3 to 4 weeks of school is going to be a bit of a review. So there's pieces of that. And then Dr. Triphammer is meeting with the nurses this week. They've been doing a lot of research and work in terms of what could it look like when we come back to school from a health safety perspective. So thinking about those kind of things with, cleaning, everything from cleaning procedures to, who knows what'll happen with masks, social distancing as much as you can. So yeah, there's a lot of things at play in terms of that.
And is that
Brian?
something, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, JB, finish your thoughts.
So kind of where I was going with that then is like, it's something, are we prepared to start thinking about even like PPE type stuff, right? Things that we have to provide. I mean, I'm assuming you guys that's part of this whole reentry piece. Because I guess where I'm coming from is it felt like there was not a lot of direction from other outside agencies, and it really was the collection of superintendents and districts getting together. So I don't know, is that, maybe all of a sudden there's other, but I guess for us as a board, more importantly, what is it we should be thinking about, right? And topics we should be covering, and even if there's budgetary things we need to be thinking through.
Yeah, I'll keep you updated. I think this committee I'm on is going to be really helpful, and they are, we do have that connection to public health
Okay.
through this group. So I think that's been our best resource is St. Louis County Public Health, because you are correct. We haven't really received much direction from the state level. So St. Louis County has kind of had to develop their own, protocols. So I'll keep you guys updated on that, but it's a great point.
I think that my only thought about it was just recognizing the high likelihood of this being a pretty dynamic situation, potentially like quite long term, would be to be thinking about what it would mean to go one-to-one for K2. So that in the event we have to do this again in the fall or over the winter, to be thinking now about having Chromebooks for those kids. Because I mean, that's obviously going to be the primary vehicle for delivering instruction if everybody's at home. And I would feel better about it if we at least had some real conversations about what it would look like to make that happen.
It's a great point. I'll get that. I'll get Sean Parker working on that cost and the timeline too, because obviously there's been a lot of backlog in ordering
100%.
Chromebooks.
Right, which is why I think it bears thinking about now instead of waiting till October and then finding out that that's where we're at again.
It's good.
Especially
And
with those of us that have kids that have already broken Chromebooks. Yes, we definitely need that. I've got a quick question about St. Louis Public Schools. So I know they've started a rumor about going back early, and I know that's probably not something that we would do because our teachers are going above and beyond. But have you heard any more about that? And then what kind of communications should we think about for our parents if they do that?
Yeah, I can check tomorrow on that, Mark. I thought about that as well, because Kelvin Adams, the superintendent, will be in on that meeting tomorrow, or at least he's planning on it. Because I've heard that as well, but then I didn't hear any kind of final confirmation or details on how they would make that happen. I know their big concern. I mean, I've heard they're reaching a relatively low number of their students, while in Brentwood we have been able to reach 100% of our kids. So we are in a different situation. Not that we always don't want more academic time. But yeah, I will try to get some confirmation on that, because I have not seen any firm plans coming from SLPS.
The other thing that the article had said is that then they were going to end school May 12th. So the whole concept didn't really make any sense. I would have thought if you wanted to start early because you wanted to get the kids back into instruction, then you would have still ended at the same time. So I really think the whole news article was just really didn't make sense. I hope that that's not something that we decide to do, because I really do, like you said, Brian, feel like our teachers have done a great job. We've had 100% student participation, and I'm not a fan of it, I guess. I guess one more question I had is, we actually in the middle school got a Friday e-blast from Dr. Lutterstein saying that there would be some future plan or future communication about how kids were going to get stuff out of backpacks and things like that. And I know lockers. I know we're still not close to that, but are we even thinking about having people come into the school to get that kind of stuff, or where are we at with that, and why, I guess?
Well, we're going to eventually need the stuff out of the lockers, because we're painting all the lockers as part of the construction projects. So yeah, Andrew Hartnett has been working with the principals on a plan, and ultimately, the last we were talking about was we would basically ask who has valuables in their lockers, and then we're going to clean out all the lockers, basically bag and tag, and and then come up with a plan where people could come up one at a time and be able to get their students' valuables. That's where we left that conversation.
Okay.
Anything else COVID related before we go to Sam?
What's the process for the students to go back and get their instruments? What is I'm sure you guys have already figured that out. That's starting tomorrow, right?
Yeah, they just, I haven't been directly involved. I've been CC'd on the emails for that. I know Grant Krenner has set it up where they're basically, I believe they're setting them out, I believe in the cafeteria, and then they set up time slots so that no family or kid would be coming at the same time.
Will the whole community know what's going on with the graduation? Just, so that if there's younger, freshmen, sophomore, juniors that want to be able to watch, if it has to be online or whatever. So will that communication only go to senior parents, or is that all that communication going to be across the board for the district?
We can have Sam speak to that too, but yeah, it would be, that's a great point, Carrie. Yeah, absolutely. That would be across the board. Now we want to still make, we still want to make a very big deal out of graduation. That is a culminating, once in a lifetime activity. So absolutely, we still want to make this a community event.
Okay.
All right, so we'll go to communication update, and Sam, I believe, is going to call me because he's live streaming, and last time it created some sound issues, so we're going to try where he calls my cell. Here he is.
Hear me?
Yeah, how's that, Sam?
Yeah, I can hear you. So hopefully everybody can hear me on your end. I think this will help a little bit with some of the sound problems that I was experiencing in the last live stream. So I think this will kind of make things run a little bit smoother. Tagging on to the conversation about graduation, since that's where we just left things off, I just want to kind of touch base on a couple of different things. One, we are working on a couple different contingencies and ideas, and actually tomorrow afternoon I'm going to be in a meeting with a few seniors that Dr. Johnson has been working with to kind of get some feedback on what is meaningful to actual seniors as far as the kind of end of the year celebrations look. So we're going to get some feedback, kind of do a focus group and talk through some of the ideas that we have, what a graduation over the summer could look like, as well as what the things we can do on the original graduation date to kind of celebrate their academic year coming to an end and their transition beyond high school. So there's a lot of great ideas. I've been looking at other school districts as well, and we're kind of ahead of the curve a little bit compared to some other folks that are just now starting to have these conversations. We've got some good ideas in place. We're starting to implement some things, and so really excited to see that progress and see what we have. But the hope is that we still have some good celebration with our seniors and with the community on the original graduation date. That will be more virtual, more fun, more kind of spotlight that we want to do. And then the hope is in July that things have been lifted enough that we can do something different. And if not, then we will be able to do something that is a virtual analog to what traditional graduation might look like. So that's kind of the process that's been in place for that. That's what we're looking at doing as far as graduation. And we're also looking at those other end of the year celebrations, not just for seniors, but for the fifth graders going up to middle school, the eighth graders going into high school, and any of those other transition pieces. And so I've been asking the principals and working with them to think through how can we make sure that we're still doing justice to the sort of end of the year traditions that we have across the board. So we'll have information and things going out on all of that throughout all this process as well. Dr. Lane also mentioned the Staff Appreciation Day on Friday and the work that's being done for that. I have actually received quite a few pictures and posters and cards and things that students have made to show their appreciation to our staff. And so it's been really great to see the community get on board with that and thank our teacher. And what I'll do is, as that stuff continues to come in this week, I'll put that into a nice video that we can share with staff so that they can see all the wishes and thoughts that our community have for our teachers, TAs, nurses, counselors, librarians, all those different folks that have been working virtually to make sure that our kiddos have access to, educational experience and good relationships still throughout all of this. So excited to be able to share some of that soon as well. The last thing that I wanted to mention is kind of a big piece, tags on to the conversation about reentry next year. Obviously, there's a lot of the academic stuff, but I've been working with other districts across the country, talking about plans for what our community needs to know over the summer. Obviously, we can't communicate some of that out until we have a better idea of how things will look here, but want to be as proactive as possible in thinking through changes might need to be, communicated, what other things our community needs to know to feel comfortable going into a new school year, coming off the tail end of something like this. So starting to get some of that research done and starting to see some consensus across the board and how districts are going to approach the community piece to all of that. So that's kind of my update for tonight. And if you have any questions, we have to answer those.
I don't have any.
Not here.
Anything for Sam?
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Sam. Let's go ahead and have Dave Gill unmute himself and give us some construction updates. You're muted, Dave.
Sam might be able to unmute him.
Yeah, it's not letting me.
Yeah, usually the host has got privileges.
On Google Meets, only the person using it can unmute themselves.
Oh, really?
The host can mute, but only the speaker can unmute in case you don't want somebody to listen in on what you're saying.
Oh.
You can't spy.
It's up to you, Dave.
Hey, Dave, just take your.
Can we call him? Because it doesn't even look like he's trying to talk to us.
I think he's trying to figure out how to turn this on. Hold on, let me call him. Hey, Dave. So just take your cursor down to the bottom of the screen and then a white bar should pop up that says meeting details on it.
How's that?
Yes.
That's better.
Yes.
All right, we got you.
All right, I'm very sorry. My report for tonight. Building addition basement floor slab has been placed and lower level masonry is progressing, which will be followed by structural steel framing, which I'm happy to report actually started today. Lower level of high school, new data room, ready for fiber optic cable installation by Charter Communications. We're still waiting for them. I guess this has affected everybody, but North building, third floor, previously has been occupied. The second floor is ready for occupancy, pending resolving the classroom carpet issue, which I believe we're going to get an answer on tomorrow in our weekly meeting with Idner and K&S. Asbestos abatement in the lower level of Building C is completed, as well as asbestos abatement in the Industrial Arts Office, which will allow start of the north elevator shaft. Demolition in the lower level of C completed, and wall framing has been started. Construction is nearing completion on classrooms 137 and 138 in Building A, which is the middle school. And abatement has started in the two rooms above, A 228 and 229. The Family and Consumer Science classroom has been vacated, and we started demolition and abatement this week. And storm sewer construction has resumed around the perimeter of the new building. As far as changes on your report, I added a brief description of what each of the numbers represent work-wise for those change orders. And if you have any further questions in that regard, I'd be happy to answer them. Schedule and future progress. It's our plan to continue to do as much classroom vacation, having teachers come in 2 at a time in each building and pack up their personal items and then vacate the rest of the rooms, followed by asbestos abatement and remodeling of the rooms. That's pretty much my report.
So, Dave, I guess you may have just answered it. I posed a question to Brian around how are we making up time, and then in the report back it said we can make up time, but there's this dependency of getting access to rooms. So is that dependency just getting the teachers in to get stuff out?
Yes, and what I've worked with Andrew Hartnett on is if a teacher can't come in and do their pack up, can we do it for them with their permission? And that's the kind of things we need to do to keep this. Right. I've given Andrew a list of all of the remaining rooms that entail asbestos abatement or abatement of any kind following the emptying of the contents. In my mind, those are the rooms that we need to address first. So that's the list that he has, and that's what we're working on at this point. So the sooner we can get all those rooms empty and abated, the better off we'll be.
Yeah. And then I guess so in terms of labor issues, it seems like based on the report, we just have not been, we're fortunate, haven't really been impacted to date with people taking voluntary leave.
There's only been 2 individuals, and one of them was the electrical contractor's foreman, and he decided that he was uncomfortable to be there. I know he has young children at home, and that was part of his decision. And the other individual was a painter who also wanted to stay home. But both of those individuals have been replaced by other employees from the same companies. Other than that, there hasn't been any vacancies due to the COVID-19.
And it's hard, I guess I'm looking for, I guess your and Brian's opinion. It's hard for me to really understand whether or not we're making up time, but do you feel like we are making up time? I mean, there's so many things going on, which I get. It'd be really nice to think that a silver lining out of all of this is that we might be able to deliver something pretty darn close to finished.
if there is any silver lining in any of this, it's that we now have access to the whole school,
Right.
and we're not interrupting learning anymore with noise or odors or that sort of thing. So that's a big help, and I'm very excited about the progress I saw today, just with the start of the structural steel going up on the new building, and I feel like we have a real chance, to make the project by August 14th, which is our original goal.
Great. And it doesn't look like we've had any more change orders in the past month. You had mentioned that as we kind of get out of the work underground and things like that, you were expecting that to taper off, and it looks like it has. Are you still feeling confident that we might be moving beyond those large change orders at this point?
I am, because I am still confident of that, because we're moving away from the existing buildings more and more as we make progress. We're into the new part of the construction, which is a new building and the addition on the high school, the new entry foyer there, and of course the 2 elevator shafts. And by and large, in building C, the north building, that's all been exposed at this point. So I do feel confident that it's going to be less. I'm not saying there's not going to be any, but I definitely think it's going to be less.
Great, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Anything else for Dave?
Dave, I want a clarification on one of the things you put for your progress summary. What is the classroom carpet issue?
On the second floor of building C, the original plans called for installing carpet tile over the existing vinyl floor covering. When we got to that point, what was discovered is the existing vinyl tile in all of those rooms, for I don't know what reason, but it was loose. It wasn't adhered to the concrete subfloor. You could take a putty knife and just put it under one edge of the tile and pop it up. So we ended up having to abate those floors because they were asbestos. And now the carpet tile that was installed over the abated floors, all the edges of the tile are curling up. They're not laying down flat. Flooring Systems, who's the subcontractor of K&S, believes it's due to the abatement chemical that was used to remove the mastic from the floors. I don't know if that's the right answer or not, but I believe we're going to have a proposed solution tomorrow in our weekly meeting. And that's what we really need to move forward.
There was also some tile in the hallways by the science labs during the parent-teacher conferences that were coming up. Is that been fixed as well, or is that the similar problem that you're speaking about right now?
We had an issue with LVT, which is the vinyl tile that's being used, specifically in the Project Lead the Way classroom, Mr. Nicodeme's classroom. And that was previously reviewed by Flooring Systems and the manufacturer. And their report at that point was that was a glue issue. And that room is scheduled to be relayed with different glue and the same LVT tile.
So basically, we're working through it. It's typical, a little bit of finger pointing. You had the tile, you know, the carpeting tile company wanting to say that it wasn't their issue, and then, you know, that it was the chemical mastic remover, and so we've put it in the carpet tile down in a you know, a different location, not above the abated floor, to see if it would curl up. So I think we're starting to get the answers to it. And so, as Dave mentioned at tomorrow's meeting, Ittner has been working with the flooring company, and Dave's been working with the companies involved. And so they're going to come back with some other potential products and solutions. Anything else for Dave?
No, thanks, Dave.
Thank you all.
All right. Have a good night, Dave.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right. Next up, I would like to ask that we make a motion to extend to June 30th our essential employee compensation. This goes back to the original board decision to allow for a 20% hourly increase for those times when essential employees need to be working on site.
Okay, can I get a motion to approve?
I move that we approve the extension of the essential employee compensation to June, was it June 30th, Brian?
Yes, sir.
To June 30th.
I'll second that.
All right, discussion?
So Brian, what's the I know we had talked about it, but financial impact, I guess these next two are together. So in total, what was the financial impact? I mean, we're looking at, on that 20% is what?
20% is averaged about $1,000 a week.
Okay.
Up to this point. It's going to vary a little bit. There, you know, for instance, one week we brought the custodians in and did some deep cleaning, and then we did not have them in the following week because the buildings were clean. There's going to come time, though, in the next couple weeks where we'd like to get a jump start on some summer projects. But yes, overall, I've been tracking it, and we're right around $1,000 a week additional.
And do you know, like, and I guess just a question for you, I'm thinking about reentry, obviously lots of pieces to this, but would it be this? I mean, you know, what would be required? Obviously, we potentially need more help, right, to go do cleaning protocol, et cetera. Is this kind of what we'd expect level of effort, or no? I mean, is it, or we have no idea?
I don't think we shouldn't need additional, because we're going to have what equates to, you know, a minimum of, you know, 8 additional weeks of time with our staff to disinfect, deep clean, utilize the products that are out there. So no, I'm confident that we can get it done with our current staff in.
Okay.
All right, any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, that passes.
Very good. Next up, looking for a motion to extend the all support staff compensation to June 30th.
I move that we extend all support staff compensation to June 30th.
Second.
Discussion?
This is just a question, and it may not pertain to this, but when we approve this, like, what happens to, like, the extra duty, extra pay that was supposed to be for coaches and things like that? Is that still going to be paid? I know that was something probably that people had figured into their salary, or I know this is new. What do we do about those kind of things?
Yeah, that's a good question, Carrie. And yeah, we have honored the extra pay, extra duty contracts, but we've also asked the people involved with those to do some activities, and I can ultimately have Dr. Ayotte report out on it. For instance, to connect with the kids, be sending them training videos, to to try to put some effort into the activity as well.
Okay. I know track was getting workouts and stuff. I just wasn't sure about across the board, all the other sports.
Yeah, that was an expectation of all of them, that they engaged with their kids in the activities.
Brian, if I was do you mind? I mean, I think it would be useful just to have Dr. Ayotte give a readout on it. I think it'd be helpful.
Yeah, I'm making a note of that right now.
All right, any other discussion?
This support staff, Brian, includes all the early childhood center as well, right?
Yes, it does. And they've actually been doing some they've been doing some great things connecting with their parents. So absolutely.
Okay, any other comments or discussion? All right, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, Brian, that passes.
Thank you. Next up, we wanted to talk about setting the last day of school. Normally, our original last day of school was May 21st. We did have 4 snow days this year that we would normally, with our usual process, make those up. My recommendation to the board is that we go with our original end date. I think that will allow us to continue to provide routine and a good experience for our kids to finish out the school year. But I don't really see benefit to extending those 4 additional days. So I just wanted to put that out for conversation and or a motion ultimately with whatever the board's decision is.
All right, I guess we'll start with a motion to approve it and then we can discuss it.
What was the date, Brian, that you're recommending?
May 21, that was the original last day of school.
So I move that we set the last day of school to May 21st as originally scheduled.
Second.
And discussion?
So I'm not opposed to this. I mean, part of this is, recognizing it's a weird time for all of us, right? It also is, per the prior conversation we had around what are we, moving up start dates, et cetera. The thing I'm cognizant about is we've got an agreement. We had X number of days that we're required to do, and I know there's leeway here, but just making sure our expectations of what we're getting from the teachers will go all the way up through that 21st, I guess is my point.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Jamie, because someone had asked, we had this conversation as a leadership team. So that doesn't mean that the teachers won't be working. I would like to use these days for the teachers to work in their PLCs and do some vertical articulation so that we can really plan how we're going to come back, as I had talked a little bit about earlier. So this does not change their work days or their work that I'm expecting out of them on those days.
And so I guess that's exactly, that's where I was going, is just getting an understanding of what the expectations are of them for those days. Because obviously, completely understand the other part, but making sure we're getting some, look, there's a lot to be planned for and thought through, right? Even if we're using those days to think through, right, what the start looks like, I think that would be really valuable.
Yeah, we could definitely use that time with the teachers. You're exactly right. There's a lot to be thinking about and put into place before we're ready to come back in August. So
then what would be the teacher's last day? Do we need to, state that as well, or?
I don't think so, Carrie, because that's covered under their contract. And doesn't change. So I think we're good on that. It's just the student last attendance day.
Okay.
Okay, any other discussion or comments on the last day? All right, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, so our day of school is May 21st for students.
All right, next up, we have, a few weeks ago, I was approached by a few of our community members. That was Sue Reeds, Faye Walmer, Paul Presson, and Mike White. And their interest was to garner additional support for Proposition E. And they felt that by working together and looking at the long-term flexibility of what the buildings could look like and some potentials, looking at ideas such as incorporating early childhood center into one or both the elementaries over time, could help to potentially garner additional support going into our election. And so that group has spoke to people such as Nancy Stoverink, myself, Steve Chodas, and they've done some good research, and they just wanted to share some information with the board on their work and their thoughts around this. So Lindsay and I spoke of this and agreed that they could be on tonight's agenda. So let's see, has Paul joined us? Should be any second. I texted him just a minute ago and told him to. Oh, there he is. Paul, I just gave you a stunning introduction that you missed.
Yeah, I can't believe it's the same Paul I know, Brian. It's weird.
I mean, it feels like forever since we've seen each other. I barely recognize anybody.
So, Paul, I did tell them just briefly about the work that the four of you have done, and kind of maybe a little bit about the original intention of the group. But beyond that, feel free to kind of jump in and tell them about your work and your thoughts of your committee, if you would.
Sure. Yeah. So, really, it kind of came down to, steal a phrase from my old favorite president, a house divided cannot stand. So kudos to Faye Walmer for reaching out to a couple of people. I think it really came down to, there were a handful of people that were really taking the time and articulating responses on some of the Facebook discussions that were, some misinformation or some misinterpretations. And so Faye reached out to Rebecca, who was on the last two facilities committees, my wife. She didn't feel like she was up for a third round of it. So since I was kind of on the committee by proxy through her, we would spend quite a bit of time every evening after the meetings talking through and having discussions. And so she suggested I participate with Faye and Mike and Susan. So really, what it boiled down to, the reason we decided to have these discussions was that we wanted to try and create a more unified group in Brentwood to support getting Prop E passed, because what we can't have is the people who all in general support the public education and want to be on board divided. And that's kind of what it felt like. Everybody here was all for, everybody in these groups and these conversations was all for supporting the Brentwood school districts. But as you said in one of the meetings we had, Brian, reasonable people can have different opinions. And that's kind of where we felt like we were stuck, because we weren't having the opportunity to, it was all these conversations going back and forth. So we decided, why don't a couple of us who may have different opinions get together and see if we can figure out a way to get everybody pointing in the same direction to support Prop E the way it needs to be to ensure that it passes. So that's kind of how we got together. We didn't want to try and dig into too many details. We just wanted to try and get some overarching ideas that we thought we could present to the board, and that would help those that were kind of on the fence or uncertain about what Prop E really meant help them get over that hump, really. So a couple of different topics, and I think Brian may have sent out my talking points that I kind of put together just to keep me on track here so that I can keep this thing moving along. Was one of the things that we had heard, if I heard it once, I heard it 100 times over the previous 6 weeks before the board voted, was we need flexibility in the future, and trying to figure out what does that really mean. And one of the things that we thought was important to people was not reducing our exposure from a physical property standpoint. So in order to help with that, would moving the ECC, let's dig in to understand what benefits we could reap from having the ECC at one or both of the elementary school sites. So that's kind of that was our starting point. That was our first we had a conversation just ourselves, and then our next one was with Brian and Nancy. And we had a Zoom call with those two and kind of dug into what benefits could we reap from having that consolidation beyond just reducing the physical footprint. And there were a number of known benefits to that. I think everyone would agree that ideally it would be great if the ECC had some better green space for those kids. One of the things that I learned through those conversations was reducing those number of transitions that the kids in that age group, from 2 to, 10 years old, 11 years old, reducing the number of transitions they have to go through. And what we learned from Nancy was it's less about the timing of that, but more about the number of them. So it's not as critical that it's at first grade or at second grade or at third grade, but just simply reducing the number of those transitions was a critical point that could have some significant benefit to all of those students. Another thing that Nancy brought up was being able to have a sort of a handoff process, having a more seamless transition from ECC, even by having it on site with the elementary school locations, having the ECC teachers kind of stay with that student for the first month or two as they transition into kindergarten to make that a little bit more seamless transition. Obviously, there can be some tremendous benefits from sharing some of those resources that maybe don't necessarily make sense to have available for every ECC student, but there are some resources that we might have at some of the elementary schools that some of the ECC students could benefit from, like having the counselor and the music teacher and some STEM classrooms and things like that. So, based on those conversations with Brian and Nancy, and then some other research that, Faye had looked up some stuff, Mike and we kind of all pulled together some research, and we kind of moved forward with, okay, we think there's an overall benefit to moving the ECC to one or both of the elementary school locations. Any questions about that before I move on? Okay. And then the other thing we wanted to talk about with Nancy and Brian was what do they believe to be our future needs for the ECC in terms of potential capacity issues. We're nearing capacity, but we still have room at the existing ECC. There's been some discussions about, does it make sense to open it up to non-Brentwood students as well? And so through some discussions with Brian and Nancy around that, as we found out that really doesn't make sense from a revenue perspective. That additional revenue historically those students have cost us more on average than we've taken in from them in that additional revenue, even charging them a non-resident rate. So we decided it probably makes the most sense to keep this consolidated to take care of those students that need it in Brentwood. So really, from Nancy's perspective, there might be an additional 1 to 2 classroom need, but certainly not a need for a significant amount of space additional. But she does love the fact that we have nearly double the size of the state mandate for our classroom sizes, which I think everybody that's been in the ECC agrees with that. Let's see. One thing to keep in mind is that there is a fluctuation from year to year in terms of students from McGrath and students from Mark Twain. So in any given year, you might have more consolidation of one school versus the other. So as those students move out, it's just something to keep in mind. But for the most part, the enrollment has been fairly steady for a few years now, somewhere between 5 and 10 different, 5 and 10 students up and down. I think that's it on the capacity and enrollment for the ECC. The next topic that we kind of talked about was what are the alignments that we thought made the most sense and should be at least considered. And this was by no means us trying to come to some solution for what should be moved forward or what should be finalized. It's just maybe we can do some research and kind of come up with some talking points around these different alignments and then present those to you guys and let you take that and kind of run with it. So the 4 different alignments we talked about were the existing 2 K-5 schools with one ECC, one of those locations having the ECC attached. 2 K-5 schools, Brian had mentioned that it would be feasible. It's something that definitely needs to be discussed. It would be feasible to have an ECC at both locations, so having it split. Do we go with the more non-traditional where you have the ECC through first or second grade at one location and then a 3 through 5 or 2 or 3 through 5 at the other location? And then the consolidated K-5 at one and the ECC through the other, which we pretty quickly ruled that one out. Just based on the property sizes, the ECC enrollment wouldn't make sense to have that taking up one of those entire properties. Let's see. I mentioned this a little bit, but just something to be aware of is the ECC, that variable ratio of students being the way they're split. That's definitely something that should be taken into account when considering should we have the ECC at one location or have it split between both locations. Just being aware of, if you had a significantly smaller size at one you're splitting between both locations. Does that make sense to have such a small enrollment at one? If one year McGrath has only 30 kids that are in the ECC and the other half is split between the other school, it might present some challenges from a staffing perspective.
I have a quick question about that, Paul.
Yeah.
I saw in Nancy's numbers that there was a bundle that was Mark Twain, a bundle that was McGrath, and then a bundle that was private. Would it be possible to kind of use, for lack of a better term, use those private school kids as a float?
That was exactly what I thought. That was exactly what my instinct was, because I thought, boy, if you could get ECC through 5 at both locations, you basically reduce that transition to 0 from ECC through 5th grade. So in my eyes, that was my first gut instinct was that sounds like a dream right there. And then they brought up the issue of the fluctuating classes between schools. But I don't know, and that's certainly something Nancy would have, but I think that would definitely be a point to look at is, would you be able to balance them between both locations by using those non-McGrath Mark Twain students? Because, they're going to be from both splits of the school. So, there's some Mark Twain or some private school students that live on both sides, basically both sides. So I think that wouldn't be, that would definitely be something that could be considered to balance the loads out from school year to school year. And then the other thing that we kind of questioned Brian a little bit on, the split, if you were to go with that ECC through first or second grade and 3 through 5, there's a number of districts that have those. And what Brian said from his experience is that most of the ones that have it right now, it's mostly based on their existing facilities. It wasn't because they specifically chose for any, specific reason that we need to do ECC through first grade or ECC through second grade. No specific academic benefits from that. It was just based on, well, we have these facilities. This is how they will fit into those if we're gonna split it this way. And Maplewood Richmond Heights was one of those. That property, we have a rental property cat-a-corner from it, and it's a pretty small property. So I think part of that was that they could only fit a ECC through, I think it's through first grade there, and that is it second grade. So that was kind of dictated by some of the properties, and then I think maybe Hazelwood has a split like that where they have a couple different properties. I think they even have 3 different locations for ECC through 5th grade. I think it's broken out into 3 maybe. I think that's it for the different things we considered. And then one thing that is certainly not something that we wanted to get into detail on, but something we thought that the board would definitely have to take into consideration would be, what is the existing property worth? Rebecca and I met with Jamie back in late January, I think, and you had mentioned that you guys had a commercial realtor just kind of give you a ballpark idea, but knowing Zach Williams, who's a McGrath parent fairly well, he's been in commercial real estate for about 15 years and works at a pretty reputable firm. So I just reached out to him and asked him if he could put something together for us, just to share. And I just sent that over to Brian right before I jumped on the call here, so he has a copy of it. But it's an official broker's opinion of value from his firm that you guys can look over. And the good news is I think it's at the upper end of the spectrum, at least from what Zach, he and I had about a 20-minute conversation after he sent it over. So I think that's something that could be important in factoring in when it would be the most financially savvy time to be able to make it. If that decided to go that direction to relocate the ECC into one or both of the schools, certainly something that's important is the financial piece of that. So I think that will be of value to be able to have that and kind of play out some different scenarios and see how that might work. So I think that's most of the fact finding and the research that we did. So kind of the way that we decided to wrap it up was like, what are some of the things that we think with that information, what can we do to try to kind of help bring the two groups that are in favor of doing everything that we can for the Brentwood public school districts, but maybe not seeing eye to eye on some of those finer points. And so we thought that these 5 points here would be helpful if we could have something kind of put out to the general public to say, these are the things that we're taking into consideration. This is, everyone's feedback is being taken, everyone's being heard, and these are all the points that we're trying to take into account when we're trying to do what's best for all of our Brentwood School District students. So just really to have a facilities plan with the goal of incorporating the ECC. I think that addresses some of the concerns that I heard from others through conversations and Facebook issues or Facebook discussions. Should Prop E pass, and I think Jamie, we talked about this before, is during that design process, having a small committee. We don't need to have a huge facilities committee like we've had in those other groups, but maybe just a small group of people that are kind of involved and help have some discussion points around the actual design process. Then initiate a process after the election, should Prop E pass, to review what'll be the most cost-effective timing and process for relocating early childhood center. And then initiate a process after the upcoming election to review the different elementary school configurations. Again, I think we have pulled all the information that we think we can provide, but it's certainly, there's no right way to make this decision. I think there's a number of ways to make this, a great situation for all the students. And then we also thought it would be helpful because there are still some people that are on the fence. I mean, I think of Kristen McDaniel at the last board meeting or the last forum, just standing up there saying she's still undecided. She wants to know more. So just make an announcement, however that happens, sometime in at least a few weeks before that vote, that just lets everyone know what all is being considered, just to kind of help rally those people that are still on that fence. I'm looking for any text messages from my fellow committee members here to see if I missed anything. I think I've covered all my notes here.
Paul, have you guys chatted with the advocacy committee at all as part of this, or?
Well, I chatted a little bit. I've chatted with Dave Spencer about it. And so, he's aware of what we were discussing. We haven't specifically had discussions around like, how does this align or anything like that? But just, I talked to Dave about what our group was intending to do. Not in great detail, but just talking about what our goal was. And we kind of finalized all of our findings and notes. Let's say Tuesday. On Monday, I sent them over to Brian, I think. Do you have anything specific that you want to know if we've discussed with them, Jamie?
No, I just was curious,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Obviously, the part of their charge is coming up with what do we message, what are we putting out in front of people,
Yeah.
What does that look like? I think they're a key piece of the puzzle. Because I don't know. Quite honestly, as a board, we voted to put this out, right? So it's out there. It needs to be voted on. I think what I'm hearing from you is the reason your group got together was how do we unite, and part of uniting is around messaging. I think that's what I heard.
Yeah.
I don't, as a board member, there's not a lot we can do other than say, hey, I think what you outlined is stuff that we've already talked about as a board. We need to have a process when this is approved to go through anyway. But, you know, my big thing is right now, the advocacy committee's out there. I know, Brian, you've been out there. I think that's a big piece of this, right? Because in terms of, I'm not sure what's actionable as a board member, you know, between now and June 2nd. Having said that, I love the fact that the group's getting together, and we, you know, here's part of the challenge, right, is how it was framed. I think we've opened up the fact that there is this notion of we've got a large footprint. How do we better manage our footprint? I think you all hit exactly on that, right? You highlighted that, hey, there are some things we can go do to potentially better or improve the efficiency and effectiveness of our footprint, I guess.
Right. Yeah, and being a McGrath parent, I feel like so many of the people were just so dead set on, we have to have this alignment. This is it. This is what we have. And if we do anything different, we got to have a damn good reason why we're going to change it. But I think just having some thoughts around saying, hey, we're not just trying to steamroll anybody here. We are trying to take all these things into account, because trust me, I was one of those people that was out there campaigning to keep both neighborhood schools. But having spent some time digging into some of this information, I don't know that I necessarily feel as strongly one way or the other. I think I'm more open, having listened to some of these details or learned some of these details. I think I'm more open to having some discussions, where before I was like, no, this is what we have. This is what I want. Why change it? It's working.
Well, and to Jamie's question, I think I thought it was important that this conversation take place first, just to, I think their group was kind of, as Paul made reference to, kind of shaping their recommendations as recently as Sunday, Monday. So we wanted to make sure that there would be alignment. I think what you're hearing, and feel free to tell me if I'm off, are things that the board has discussed and would ultimately, I believe would be in favor of, because it's things that we've talked about. And ultimately, at the end of this conversation, I think some of these talking points need to be shared with the advocacy committee. And when you're talking about things that could resonate with the community, things I'm in favor of personally, such as, when it fiscally makes sense to reduce our footprint as a district and find some cost savings when that makes sense. If we see an opportunity to reduce transitions for students, whether that's early childhood at one or both of the district locations, I think that makes a lot of sense, both from a fiscal and from an educational viewpoint. And of course, when we design these buildings, they're going to be designed for maximum flexibility. I think we need to be clear with our community, though, that we're not saying we're going to change the configuration at this point. These buildings are still going to open as 2 K-5 buildings. But, I believe what we're saying, and even what, and what Paul's group is saying, is that they are going to be designed both for, additional students coming in, for this possibility of incorporating the ECC, however that would play out. It's really just about flexibility and long-term planning. But Paul, is that fair to say?
I think so. Yeah.
I think something else that I think we've all learned from this pandemic is the kids have learned how to be taught virtually. I mean, when you look at it and it comes down to it, it's really not about the buildings. I mean, yes, having state-of-the-art buildings would be great, but I think, number one, finding out what this is going to cost is a big thing, because as a taxpayer and as a parent, after seeing what our teachers have done to virtually teach our children, I want to make sure that what we decide to do, we do our best to watch our dollars because I want to be able to maintain the teachers that we have who've done a phenomenal job doing this virtual teaching, because our kids can learn anywhere. And the thing that our kids really want, that I hear, they want to be with their friends and they want to be with their teachers. Buildings are important, but I don't think they're the most important thing. The most important thing is the education, the teachers that we have to teach it, and what's best for the kids.
So, Paul, I've got a quick question for you. Brian just outlined that he doesn't think we can change the messaging for Proposition E, and that we still need to continue to have 2 K through 5 schools. How do we build 2 K through 5 schools that then incorporate an ECC?
Well, I think, I mean, most of my experience in construction is in residential, not in commercial, but I think that they can be built in such a way, to me, it would make sense to build them in such a way that they could be adapted with, you're going to make a decision during that, you make decisions during that design process to be able to accommodate that at a later time to minimize the disruption and the cost to that. If you, after further examination, then the financial piece says, you know what, it's best to wait this next 8 or 9 years out and then look at potentially relocating it. I think that's probably the smart thing to do. But I think that one or both of the buildings, and it could be a decision where, prior to construction, that analysis could be done where you said, okay, there's one far more logical place to relocate the ECC to, or if it ends up being both, I think you can just be mindful of that during that design and construction process to make the new schools adaptable to where that process is as easy as possible.
Did you guys look? I mean, so I'm going to poke at this a little bit. You guys didn't look at any of the financials, right? Explore what it might. Here's where I'm going with this. What I've heard embedded in this is there's this assumption that it's going to be more expensive to move the ECC. Plus, we've already messaged that it's 2K through 5. But what if we got into this and we looked at it and said we could go do it now? I mean, Nancy said, hey, there's some educational benefit. So I want to be very clear around this. If what I've heard makes perfect sense, but what I'm also hearing, though, subtly, or maybe not so subtle, is at some point in the future, but if we really were to do this and be good stewards of this, why wouldn't we look at, hey, what's it going to cost to go do it now? Why would we wait if there's an educational benefit?
If you're asking me personally, I think I would much prefer to have all this stuff done at the same time, because I mean, someone could tell me, and I would have, if someone could show me that it would be different, fine, but I would have to believe that it would be more cost effective to do that at the same time.
Yeah. Sorry, Brian. I don't want to. This is not a personal thing, but what I want to be clear is you all did not start diving into that. What you guys have said, and you've done, I really appreciate all the work you all did, is that, hey, there is some benefit in doing this. This is something we can rally around, and hey, board, this is just something we want you to consider.
Yeah. But I think we didn't feel it was our place to start digging into actual costs of, okay, what does it look like to do that now? What does it look like to do that in 3 years? What does it look like that was in 8 years? But that's why I felt like we just said, okay, here are the different scenarios. But if, you guys and the administration and the CFO sit down and say, you know what, based on what we think the value of the existing CC is and what kind of capital reserves we have now, we might be able to pull this off without having to, issue any other bonds or, come back for another bond in a year or two when it's time to start building. So we just felt like that was not something that we should be digging into that level of detail of the financials. But I mean, again, personally, I think that I'd have a hard time not believing that you wouldn't save some money being able to do it at the exact same time as building the new schools.
Yeah, just a couple things on that in terms of and I do think this would be good for further board conversation. You got a couple things. Yeah, basically this building is worth anywhere from 2.4 to $3 million now that we've had 3 different commercial real estate appraisals done on it. Currently we owe in the neighborhood of 6 on it. And the other factor is those bonds are not callable until 2023. So we're 3 years out until those bonds can be called. Now at that point, absolutely, and going into that to take a look at it. But yeah, and you know, and part of it too, absolutely, during the whole design and construction phase, you know, if we see opportunities to you know, to get more out of these buildings in terms of, you know, if we get into it and there's a possibility, it depends on construction cost and, you know, what our bids are and everything else. But if we see the possibility to add any additional classrooms, we're absolutely, you know, going to pursue that and have those discussions. One conversation though that I've had with community members, including Faye, is just we got to be careful that we're not over promising and under delivering. We're not saying that for that original $29 million that we can tack on a 8-room early childhood center to one of these buildings, because I don't feel that that's a realistic thing to say to our community. But to Paul's point, could you get part, you know, hopefully you could get, you know, a piece of that done, and then would you design one or both of the buildings so that you could quite reasonably, and we could get costs going into that. I actually have it or already working on the cost for those classrooms at one or both of the buildings, so that we would have a ballpark soon on those, just so we would know going down the road whether would it be possible to do that out of capital projects reserves. Would it require a small no tax increase bond issue several years down the road? You know, just that long-term planning piece.
So Paul, one of the other things that I'm expecting is you kind of were trying to get some alignment from this board too. So as you know, we were not exactly aligned. And I think it'd be great if we were all aligned and we could come to like one vision for the district, because I really think, you know, a house divided cannot stand. And that's what I'm really worried about with Prop E right now. So, I mean, one of the things that I would say is that I really think this board should come back and look at this. You've actually outlined 4 different options. Actually, on page 14, it looks like you've narrowed it down to 2 for us. And maybe we should just have a conversation and see whether or not we want to even have another communication with the Brentwood community in general. Because one of the things that you guys have outlined is that, and that I'm a strong backer of, is preserving our neighborhood schools. And when we have one school that is not in the neighborhood, it sort of just makes sense to me that we would consolidate at some point. And if we're thinking about this as like a 50-year decision, preserving the Mark Twain site and the McGrath site for the next 50 years is something I could 100% get behind.
Sure.
I'm you know, I'll chime in. I think I'm glad that the groups are talking. I think there's some good discussion going on here. I'm glad to see there's some discussion on educational benefit of bringing the schools together. I think that's what we struggled a lot with over the past year and a half, is educational benefit to the whole. Spending $29 million, which educational benefit? Obviously, we get, you know, new schools and things, but I also struggle with you know, something you said earlier, Jamie. I mean, the bond language is out there. We just got to go vote on it and see what happens. And look, if anyone out there, you try and convince anybody out there who's on one side of the fence, the other. If you build 2 K-5s and just you know, pray and hope the school district does something different in the future in 5 years, it's unlikely. I mean, we built 2 K-5s, it'll be K-5s for the next 50 years, right? Yeah. If we were to maybe think about consolidating in year 7 or year 5 or 10, it's because we're under duress. We got to cut costs, and we'll do it a haphazard way, and we won't be able to get additional bond dollars to do any buildings. It'll be we're whacking teachers and cutting because we can't pay salaries. So that's my only struggle with it. I mean, the direction of the conversation is great, and it's where we need to go. Absolutely. I just struggle with how we convince people that say, stop giving me tax increases, to say, yeah, give us this money now, and I promise you we'll do something different in the future if it looks right. I don't know how we get those people convinced that voting for this solves that need. or convinces them. That's what I'm struggling. I know, Jamie. I know. I don't know how we get there. How do we take this conversation and have it impact the bond, the vote, I don't know.
Well, I think, yeah, ultimately, yeah, if people are in the camp where they're strongly not in favor of 2K5 configurations, then yeah, I don't know that this is necessarily going to sway them. I think it's a good practice that both this community group and the board is having discussions about long-term planning. That all being said, yeah, I firmly believe that, you know, if you have to do exactly what we've been talking about for the initial piece, but I don't know who wouldn't be in favor of the idea that when it makes fiscal sense, and you could certainly talk about the academic benefits of incorporating the early childhood into some other existing properties and reducing our footprint as a district, and the fact that we're talking about this, I think it's a positive. I don't know that it changes people's mind in terms of the vote. I guess we'll figure that out in June 2nd.
Yeah, Brian, I don't think any of us thought that the people, you know, if you're looking at a spectrum of 1 to 10 in terms of support for the existing property, you know, language, I don't think there was any misconception that we're going to get people from a 2 to a 3 to a, you know, if 5 is voting one way, you know, 4 and below is voting one way and 5 and above is voting the other. I don't think you're going to get anybody from a 2 or a 3 to a 6 or a 7 to change that vote. But I think it's those people that are a 4 or a 5, getting them over that hump that would allow us to get it passed.
Well, and I think part of what this has shown is that the conversation about forward thinking with our facilities and being flexible now as much as we can and looking at where we can move in the future is a very important conversation for us to be having. And the messaging needs to be clear that that's what we want to do with this bond. I guess if we can have clear talking points with the advocacy group that we as a board support, of course, and are things that are attainable, and there are some talking points that could help us garner some more support for this moving forward.
So I guess where I would go, if I think specific things that could or should happen. First, big thank you. I mean, Faye, Paul, Sue, Mike, for, I mean, this document is fantastic. And I know a lot of time and effort went into it. And I know a lot is going on in the world with all of us. So huge thanks for that. I mean, I do think this warrants conversation with the board, and I do think it warrants an open forum with the advocacy committee to talk through this. Because I will say, we know there's a couple things that are very different where we sit today from when we voted to put this on the ballot. I mean, COVID-19 goes without saying, right? But in addition, it was very late in the conversation where ECC was introduced. And quite honestly, we did not spend proper amount of time thinking about what that might look like. We came up with flexibility. And so I think as a board, it would be prudent for us to engage with the advocacy committee in an open forum. I mean, there's nothing to hide here. It's important, though, to be talking through what do you mean by flexibility. I'll be very frank with you all. Jamie Allen, as a board member, that language says we need to tear down the McGrath site and renovate the Mark Twain site. That's what it says, right? For $29 million or less. That's what it says. And yes, we can absolutely claim it's 2K through 5 start. Nothing what this group just presented suggested it wouldn't have to be that. What they did suggest is, hey, we have a really good opportunity with significant educational value, underline, bold, to reduce a footprint potentially and enhance that educational value. We should be talking about that. And we should be forthright with what that might look like so that people are very clear what they're voting for when they hit the polls on June 2nd.
I think you pretty much summarized our feelings, Jamie.
So I also want to highlight some of the financial information on page 12 and 13. So our CFO does paint a very pretty picture if this was 2008 again, right? So if COVID-19 has the impact similar to 2008, we're talking about going back, in 20, I'm trying to scan through the notes, like 23, 26. So forget about 10 years for operating. We're going back in 23. And that puts a lot of stress, I think, on our teacher salaries as well. So I think that's something else that we should probably think about as a board. If we think this is going to continue from an economic impact. And, I'm speaking from someone who is currently working for Washington University, and we know I'm there from the news.
Yeah, I just saw HCA's profits for 44% today for the month, I think.
How about anything else for Paul tonight?
I'll echo Jamie's comments. I really appreciate others the time you guys have put into this. This is, it takes a lot, and I'm glad to see people motivated. So thanks for you, Faye, and others too. It's good.
No problem.
Yes, thank you. It's exciting.
Yeah, thank you too. I can tell you a lot of time into it, and I appreciate that. I guess I'm looping back a bit something I think Jamie asked. I guess what do we need to do to further this? Because the way I look at it, what we're supposed to do these is to allow us to do these things at the 2 elementary school sites, working at childhood education. At some point in time, as soon as possible, or later time is not inconsistent with that at all. But I think it bolsters the position that we're making the best of McGrath and Mark Twain sites if we can work early childhood education in there, and and eliminate the one facility in the industrial park. But I guess then all I would ask to further what your group has done, what would you want the board to be doing in the near future beyond what we talked about, I guess? That was something that was a little bit unclear to me, other than being philosophically flexible, which I think we were already do that.
Right.
And I'm not being facetious, but I'm curious on that.
Yeah, I mean that's something I wasn't exactly certain of myself. I didn't, we talked a little bit about what, this isn't, because we talked about it. There's not really something for you guys to vote on here. So we just thought at this point, let's bring this information to the board and discuss how can we take it and put it to use for us to the best way we can because from what I heard is a lot of people, their uncertainty was based on some of the other uncertainties, like what does it mean in the long term for us? So let's take some of that information. Let's put a little bit more concrete plans around the long-term plans for the district. That makes me feel a little bit better about where we're going with this $29 million. So I don't know that we have specific, we have a couple of asks here from the board, but I don't know that we had anything specific, like, a resolution or anything like that.
Paul, do you think that it could be your committee working in conjunction with the advocacy committee to have a few additional talking points that potentially could go back to the board for some form of endorsement or approval?
I'm sure we could, yeah.
And one thing that I want to say, I voted for Prop B, and I voted for Prop B because I wanted to make sure that the community had a chance to weigh in, and because I thought there was going to be flexibility. I will say, currently, from what I've heard from the advocacy group, is not what I would find as flexibility. So I'm really intrigued to see what those new talking points would be.
All right, team. Anything else for Paul this evening?
No, Paul, thank you. Good.
All right,
Thanks, Paul.
Great job. Thanks, Paul. All right, and that ends the superintendent report for tonight.
All right. Do we have an update from SSD?
You do not.
About MSBA?
There's nothing. The region was canceled.
Okay. And then we've got some upcoming events, not any that are face-to-face. At this time. Is there anything you need from us, Kate?
No.
What was the recognition ceremony?
That's been the one we have in the spring for staff, people that are retiring, people that are celebrating milestones. That's going to be moved. We're looking at fall now as an option.
Okay.
Hey, do you get notification when you complete the personal disclosure filing?
I click on the website and it'll say that you've completed it if you have.
Okay. I honestly can't remember. Okay. I had it out at one point. I don't remember if I finalized it and submitted it or I just started it.
Okay, I can look and let you know.
Can you do the same for me too?
Yes.
All right. The other dates, there's the election, hopefully on a June 2nd, as well as a policy meeting. Hey, and Brian, on here it has a photo session on June 16th. Do you want to let us know what that is?
I would if I knew.
Oh, yeah. Originally that was supposed to be in April, but after the election. Sam wanted to get photographs of the board members. And so since the election will happen and then the first board meeting will be on the 16th, that's what that would be.
So I assume Sam just took screenshots night of the meeting.
Will we be having policy meeting on May 5th at this point? And you'll just let us know if for some reason that changes, Brian?
I'll let you know, and Lindsay and I will talk. Right now, we don't have any outstanding policies, so unless there are some COVID-related issues or something that needs some immediate attention, but we'll let you know about that.
Okay, well, anything else before we adjourn to closed session? No? All right, I'm looking to adjourn to closed session for the reasons stated in the agenda.
I move that we adjourn and move to closed session for the reasons stated in the agenda.
All right, if we could have a roll call, please.
Jamie Allen,
Yes.
Dan Brule,
Yes.
Melissa Garrett,
Yes.
Keith Rainbird,
Yes.
Lindsay Spencer, Mark Moore.
Yes.
All right,
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
thanks.
Okay.
Hey, Brian, can you have the closed meetings and take time now?
I know I have it right here as a board